where you see the passing of time.
The crowds in St. Peter's Square are praying like mad for the Pope's life.
Where moments refuse to die.
This is a momentous hour in world history. This is the invasion of Hitler's Europe.
And where victory lives on.
Plenty of girls are being kissed by plenty of boys they don't know, and they do not care.
You can love it, hate it, embrace it, or turn away.
Lennon was shot to death late last night outside his apartment building.
But it is a past we all share.
Come on out here and give me a salute. Big Navy salute.
This is where yesterday has a home, where we wonder what it was like back then.
Go forward, knights, in safety.
And not too long ago.
His spirit must live on.
It's where history has its place and where the past comes alive. The History Channel.
July 30th, 1945. The USS Indianapolis clips through the waters of the South Pacific en route to the Philippines. Her captain and crew are unaware that she is being stalked by the killer Japanese sub I-58. Struck by 2 torpedoes, the Indianapolis rapidly begins sinking. Hundreds of sailors frantically leap from the decks into the Philippine Sea. The men watch in horror as the pride of the Fifth Fleet slips beneath the waves.
I thought to myself, 5 minutes ago I had a home, a dry home. Now I have nothing. Now what am I going to do?
Now, unbeknownst to the United States Navy, 880 men are left to fight for their lives in the shark-infested waters of the South Pacific. Missing, the USS Indianapolis. When men put to sea in time of war, they know that death can come swiftly. The crew of the USS Indianapolis discovered that the enemy they would battle for survival dwelt not only in the skies above and the fathomless depths below, but also within their very souls and psyches. In May of 1945, at the zenith of World War II, a U.S. Navy cruiser Indianapolis limped into port for repairs at Mare Island near San Francisco. During the bloody Battle of Okinawa, she'd fallen victim to a suicide bomber, sustaining severe damage to 7 of her decks. Men worked around the clock to make the flagship of the Pacific Fifth Fleet battle-ready, turning the shipyard into a symphony of air drills and hammerings. As for her crew, the Indy's time in dry dock provided them a welcome relief from the relentless pressures of combat duty.
The crew was very close. There are moments when you are very tense, especially when you're getting close to the enemy. You never know when a torpedo is going to slam into you. But we also had our light moments. We would sit and tell stories about our lives, our girlfriends. We were always talking about our girlfriends. It was a subject that came up every day.
While the crew enjoyed their time ashore, the wait seemed interminable for the Indy's commander, Captain Charles Butler McVeigh III. War was no stranger to the handsome McVeigh. He was the son of the former commander-in-chief of the Asiatic Fleet and a graduate of Annapolis. During the course of World War II, he received the Silver Star and had seen action in the battles of Solomon Islands and Okinawa. McVeigh had long-term naval ambitions and eagerly awaited a return to the war effort in the South Pacific, where the Allies were quickly gaining superiority over the once mighty Japanese Navy. After 3 months of extensive repairs, the Indianapolis emerged, sleek and sturdy, every inch the proud flagship that had ferried President Franklin Roosevelt to diplomatic missions around the world.
When the ship was finished, we suddenly got orders one day to proceed to Hunters Point, which was down off San Francisco.
Captain McVeigh was called into his superior's office at Hunters Point and told that there had been a change of plans. Because the Indianapolis was one of the fastest cruisers in the fleet, she was chosen to take on a top-secret cargo and proceed to Pearl Harbor as quickly as possible. On July 15, 1945, amid heavy security, the Indianapolis picked up her mysterious cargo at Hunters Point Naval Shipyard.
We went alongside the dock, and 2 trucks came along. One truck had a lot of men in it and 2 Army officers. And the other truck had a big crate that was almost as big as this room. And a small container that stood about this high and was about this square.
21-year-old Grover Carver was one of the men who loaded the smaller container onto the Indianapolis.
We carried it to the Admiral's quarters. A guard escorted us, and a guard was left on the door. So I knew it was something very important, but I didn't have the least idea what it was.
Rumors were that it was underwear of Marilyn Monroe, and it was rumored also that it just had stuff in there for General MacArthur. You know, just all sorts of things that men's minds can conceive of.
The men aboard the Indy joked about the secret cargo, but they could not have imagined its deadly potential. At 8 a.m. on July 16th, the Indianapolis departed for Pearl Harbor. Any doubts about her post-repair condition were immediately laid to rest. Cutting through the sparkling blue waters of the Pacific, she averaged an amazing 29 knots, setting a new speed record from San Francisco to Honolulu. The return to Pearl Harbor was a painful one for Al Havens, who had lost his older brother during the Japanese surprise attack in 1941. Havens, who had survived the kamikaze raid on Indianapolis as well as other fierce battles in the Pacific, was looking forward to a scheduled transfer off the cruiser upon reaching Honolulu.
We were close by when ships were hit and badly burned, and hundreds and thousands of guys died. And so I got to thinking about that, and so I decided, well, hey, 2 years and 10 months overseas is enough. We'll just let some of the younger guys go over there and finish up.
Al Havens never received his transfer. The only men allowed to leave the Indianapolis in the midst of her top-secret mission were Captain McVeigh and a few of his officers. They soon returned with their routing orders. They were to make top speed to Tinian Island in the South Pacific.
Captain McVeigh called us together, told us that we had this material, we were to deliver it. He said, I don't know what it is, but he said, I've been told that every day after the off the trip is a day off the war.
Continuing her breakneck pace, the Indy swiftly cut through the waves for 3,300 miles and reached the remote island of Tinian on July 26, 1945. There, the B-29 bomber Enola Gay marked time in a secluded hangar, awaiting the mysterious cargo the Indianapolis had delivered, the prime components of the atom bomb. There would be no congratulatory handshakes or celebration for Captain Charles Butler McVeigh and his crew of 1,196 men. Instead, they were given new orders by the Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific, Admiral Chester Nimitz. The Indianapolis was to ship out immediately.
We went down to Guam. At that time, Captain McVeigh got his orders, and it was told to proceed to the Philippine Islands and to join task force there for training and preparation for the invasion of Kyushu.
McVeigh's orders routed the Indianapolis through the heavily traveled Leyte shipping lanes in the Philippine Sea. Although 7 different command centers received the ship's routing orders, there would be a breakdown in communication, a human error that would prove more fatal than any in the history of the U.S. Navy.
On July 26, 1945, Pacific Command Headquarters sent a message to Vice Admiral Ohlendorf and Rear Admiral McCormick, informing them that the Indianapolis was to report to McCormick for 10 days of training. McCormick's staff incorrectly decoded the message and did not bother to ask for a retransmission. The end result of all this message confusion was that Ohlendorf knew the Indianapolis was coming, but he didn't know when. McCormick knew when the Indianapolis was coming, but he still did not know that the ship was to report to him for 10 days of training.
Before leaving Guam, Captain McVeigh asked for a destroyer escort. Headquarters denied his request, citing the fact that there had been no significant submarine activity in the area. McVeigh's superiors did, however, instruct him to implement the evasive navigational maneuver known as zigzagging at his own discretion. The massive battleship Indianapolis finally eased her way out of Guam's harbor on July 28th and headed toward the open waters of the South Pacific. Her captain felt confident of a routine passage to the Philippines. But McVeigh was missing a vital piece of information. What he had not been told during his final debriefing at Guam was that there had indeed been recent Japanese submarine attacks in the shipping lanes he was about to enter. Only 4 days earlier, a U.S. Navy destroyer had been torpedoed and sunk by the Japanese submarine I-53, a member of the deadly Tamon fleet. July 1945. As the USS Indianapolis made for her destination of Leyte in the Philippines, the Japanese submarines of the celebrated Tamon Group prowled the waters of the South Pacific.
This select group of 4 Japanese submarines had been outfitted with improved radar and torpedoes. These submarines had specifically been assigned the duty to seek out and destroy American ships.
One member of the fearsome Tamon fleet was I-58, under the command of Mochitsura Hashimoto. The proud Hashimoto was well liked and respected by his men, despite having had little success during the war.
Every time he tried to hit his ship, something went wrong with his equipment, or he was ordered to come back before he could attack or something. And he hadn't hit a single ship up to then, and the war was ending, he knew, and he was dying to get at least one ship.
Hashimoto and his men had sailed out of Kure, Japan on July 16th, intent upon destroying Allied ships and bringing honor to their beloved Emperor Hirohito. On July 27th, I-58 arrived at the Guam Leyte shipping lane. Her commander prayed for glory at his ship's shrine and began his patient wait for the enemy. "500 miles away, now over a day out of Guam, Captain McVeigh sensed that his crew was tired as a result of their around-the-clock watches.
Captain McVeigh said the crew needs a rest. We're going to have rope yarn Sunday, which in the Navy means that there Everybody stands there, watches, but there are no drills and no lectures and all this thing.
The crew's morale lifted as a result of this welcome break. Rested and refreshed, the men ended their Sunday watching a brilliant orange sun dip below the horizon of the placid South Pacific. Standing on the bridge at 7:30 p.m., Captain McVeigh gave the order to cease zigzagging. Poor visibility and choppy seas, coupled with the report from Guam of negligible submarine activity in the area, convinced him that there was little chance of being attacked by a Japanese sub. At 11 p.m., McVeigh retired to his cabin for the evening, secure in the belief that the Indianapolis was safe and making good time toward her final destination of the Philippines. 2 miles away beneath the churning waves, McVeigh's counterpart, Commander Hashimoto, was just awakening to attend to his duties and resume the hunt for enemy ships. Visibility was poor until the moon peeked through the clouds, briefly revealing a silhouette on the horizon some 10,000 yards away.
Hashimoto immediately rushed to the bridge and through his binoculars was able to see a dark spot moving across the horizon. He immediately ordered the submarine to submerge. He constantly followed the ship through the periscope.
Aboard I-58, the tension mounted when Hashimoto realized that the indistinct dot on the horizon was an Idaho-class battleship or cruiser. At 12:05 a.m., he gave the order to fire. 6 of the deadliest torpedoes in the world headed directly for the USS Indianapolis. On board the Indianapolis, the quiet of the evening had settled onto the ship. As the 12 to 4 a.m. watch came on duty, the majority of the cruise's 1,196 crew members were asleep in their berths. The stillness was shattered by the explosion of the first torpedo, hitting the Indy's starboard bow.
I awakened in the air with my room lit up, and it's funny how certain things hit your mind. I had a lamp on my desk that was bolted to the desk, a lamp, and it was in the air alongside of me. So I knew we'd been torpedoed.
The first thing I thought of was a suicide plane because it felt exactly like it did when that suicide plane hit us. The ship, almost came out of the water with the explosion from it.
Within 3 seconds of the first explosion, a second torpedo found its mark. The 10,000-ton Indianapolis shuddered violently as the missile triggered another explosion. The mortally wounded ship took on a list from which she would never recover as tons of seawater poured into her severely damaged bow. On board the ill-fated cruiser, men awakened to a fiery nightmare that was all too real.
I was headed for my battle station, which was up front, a firefighter. And when I arrived on the quarterdeck, a man came up from down below that was badly burned. So I took him into the port hangar, put him up against the deck on a blanket, covered him up, and told him to lie still. I would go get a corpsman or a doctor. I would find help for him.
Indianapolis chief physician, Dr. Lewis Haynes, along with hundreds of other sailors, was trapped in a raging inferno below the cruiser's decks.
As I went out of my room, Ken Stout, who had the room right across from me, was coming out of his. And Ken said, "Let's get out of here, Lou." And I said, "Lead on." And he started to step into the passageway, and he threw his hands up like this and said, "Look out." And I had my life jacket in my hand, and I pulled it up like this, and a big wall of fire went through. I never saw Ken after that.
On the ship's bridge, Captain McVeigh initially believed the Indy could be saved, so long as her engines were shut down.
Because communications had been destroyed, officers on the bridge were unable to contact the engine room and order the engine stopped. The ship continued to plow itself forward, and with the bow blown off, was taking on huge amounts of water.
McVeigh sent one of his officers to assess the wounded vessel's damage. He soon returned with the somber news that the Indy was doomed. Her list had increased over 6 degrees in less than 2 minutes. She was sinking bow first into the Philippine Sea. Hundreds of men gathered on deck awaiting orders. Miraculously, Dr. Lewis Haynes escaped to safety through an open porthole. Despite third-degree burns to his hands and head, he continued treating patients.
I remember I was giving one patient who was badly burned morphine, and I passed out and fell on him, and he gave me a shove. It was amazing. All the crews were at their station. It was quiet, well organized, everything. But down below where we were, it was just hell and turmoil. So we got the life jackets and started putting them on the patients.
After ordering radio officers to send a distress signal detailing the Indianapolis location, Captain McVeigh gave the order to abandon ship.
The ship gave a lurch. And all my patients, everybody started to slide away. I reached up behind me. I was near the lifeline, grabbed the lifeline, and the ship just went very rapidly over.
I knew the ship was going, and I knew it was going very fast because it had already, within 5 minutes, it had rolled from an upright position to completely on its starboard side. I said, she's gone, so get away from it. We were taught in boot camp, when things like this happen, go off on the high side, swim into the wind.
Dr. Haynes and his patients were on the starboard side of the Indianapolis, which was partially submerged in the foamy swells of the South Pacific.
There were a large number of us, and we walked down the side of the ship and jumped into the water. As the ship went by us, rose up, kept going. She stood up on her nose and went down.
At 12:17 a.m. July 30th, less than 12 minutes after being hit by I-58's torpedoes, the 10,000-ton Indianapolis turned bow down and with a resounding rush of air and water plunged headfirst into the fathomless depths.
As she went down very fast, the compartments full of air exploded, and we were tumbled and washed one way, and the people that were on the other side were tumbled and washed the other way.
I sure hate to see that last little bit of that ship go down and left us in the water.
That was a frightening thing. There, I thought to myself, 5 minutes ago I had a home, a dry home. Now I have nothing. Now what am I going to do?
300 men went down with the Indianapolis. The 880 sailors who were able to abandon ship were spread out over a 20-mile area. Enveloped by black water and blacker night, the Indy's surviving crew clung together, expecting an immediate rescue. For most, such a rescue would never come. July 30th, 1945. With the twisted remains of the USS Indianapolis now resting on the bottom of the South Pacific, 880 dazed and injured crew members fought 10-foot swells as they frantically searched the lonely darkness for other survivors. A few groups of men, the rafters, were lucky enough to have found life rafts and floater nets. However, the vast majority, the swimmers, had only their life jackets and each other to depend upon for survival.
We had nothing. We had no food, we had no water, we had a large number of men without life jackets. I had a lot of injured men, burned men, sick men. We knew we had to stay together to be saved.
Some of the men were so terribly brave, holding up their comrades, even though they themselves were in danger of going down. Dr. Haynes, who was going from man to man, trying to, give them some hope that just, somebody will come and save them. And people were just dying in each other's arms.
Cool darkness eventually gave way to daylight, and the sun began to beat down upon the men adrift in the water. Having spent the prior evening swimming alone for nearly an hour, Al Havens had joined a group of 4 men with the badly damaged life raft.
Early in the morning, before noon, we met up with the captain, and he had 2 rafts with him, and he did have some supplies on his raft. His raft was in good shape.
Captain McVeigh quickly took stock of the few existing provisions: a can of Spam and some malted milk tablets. He talked with his men, trying to comfort them.
He wanted to know about our family, mother and dad, our girlfriends, our marital status, our children, because that's something that we could look forward to. Rescue was imminent as far as I was concerned.
Conditions in Dr. Lewis Haynes' swimmer group of 400 men were grim. Already the sea was taking its toll on those that were badly burned or injured.
They would yell to me, "Doc, is this guy dead or alive?" And I'd put my finger on his eyeball, and he didn't blink or anything. I'd say he was dead. And then we would take his life jacket off, and we just let him go. And then we would say the Lord's Prayer. And to this day, I can't say the Lord's Prayer without crying. I just can't.
By the end of their first day in the water, 50 of the 400 men in Dr. Haynes' group were dead.
About noon of the first day, that's when the sharks appeared.
We didn't have the battles that these other guys had out there. They came around, but we'd slap on the water and they'd go away.
I did not see a shark attack the man. I had one man that had a hand bitten by a shark. But I think the sharks had so many dead bodies to feed on, they didn't care.
Those in the rafter groups fared slightly better, but were still menaced by the shadowy forms lurking in the water beneath them.
Our raft was damaged, and our feet was in the water. There were 5 sharks just lying there about a foot from the raft, just waiting for, something to happen.
The ever-present man-eaters proved to be only one of the sailors' concerns on their second night in the water, as cool trade winds raced across the Pacific.
Everybody had a terrible chill, and everybody shot a high fever, and some guy in the middle of the group yelled, "There's a Jap here, he's trying to kill me," and everybody started to fight the Jap. But they were fighting their buddies. They were delirious and out of their minds. And so the group all broke up.
As the survivors descended into disarray, their anguished cries for help went unheard by personnel in the office of the port director of the Philippines, 500 miles away. Although the Indy hadn't reached Leyte as expected on Tuesday, wartime protocol did not provide clear orders for action to be taken for the non-arrival of a combatant ship.
In retrospect, a message should have been sent Tuesday evening to the Indianapolis asking for a revised estimated time of arrival. No message was sent, and by Thursday evening, the Philippine sea frontier still did not know that a heavy cruiser with 1,200 men had been sunk and was missing since Monday morning.
It appeared that the world had forgotten the men of the USS Indianapolis. On their third day in the water, the hopes of the men of the USS Indianapolis ebbed and flowed with sightings of Navy planes high overhead. Flying their various sorties, the pilots were unaware of the hellish circumstances below.
Things began to look, a little bit dark for us. We were a very important ship. We were a flagship of the Fifth Fleet. We could not understand why search parties had not been launched.
With each passing hour, more and more men succumbed to dehydration and the elements. The cruel irony of being surrounded by water that was unfit to drink took an especially high toll in Dr. Haynes' swimmers group.
When you drink salt water, it's like a dose of salt. You get more and more dehydrated, you want to drink more. And then they became very maniacal and began to thrash around. We were losing a good man for everyone that had drank water. So it may sound terrible, but towards the end, if somebody drank salt water and did this, we pushed them away from the group.
We would go have hallucinations, and we would think that there is an island out there. In our minds, we saw lights and everything like that out there. And some of them swam away to go into those lights, but there was nothing there.
By the end of the third day, fewer than half of the original 880 men in the water were alive. The bodies of the dead littered a 25-mile stretch of ocean. Day 4 dawned on the sailors of the Indianapolis, along with the realization that they were virtually invisible to the planes that continued to pass overhead. The waterlogged life jackets worn by those in Dr. Haynes' group were quickly losing their buoyancy, and the struggle to stay afloat became increasingly desperate.
People held me up, and I held others up. You had to stay together to stay alive. Captain Parks, for example. He took off his jacket a couple of times and gave it to men. He worked, both he and Moinello, keeping our group together to the point where they died of exhaustion. Father Conway died in my arms of exhaustion.
To survive, you had to almost be a Superman. Because imagine 4 days in the water without any food, without any drink.
Eventually, this became our way of life. This is what we were going to do forever. We didn't think about rescue or anything else. So we know this was what we did. This was what we were.
The same sense of despair clung to another group of sailors floating on makeshift rafts nearly 20 miles away. Their spirits lifted, however, when they spotted the silver glint of a plane, this time flying low overhead.
That was the most beautiful thing we ever saw in my life. We all was glad to see that.
That plane was flown by Lieutenant Wilbur Gwynn. Gwynn was flying a routine mission searching for enemy subs when he noticed a large black oil slick extending for over 25 miles. Assuming a Japanese sub had gone down, he took his plane lower for a closer look.
When he came down, there's all these guys in the water. There was a raft right in the middle of this oil slick, and he recognized it being guys waving to him, so he pulled up, and he started circling.
Gwynn flew along the oil slick and discovered what he believed to be 120 more men floating in various groups, desperately clinging to rafts and each other. He radioed for a rescue ship and dropped life rafts and supplies down to the men. Grover Carver was one of the first fortunate sailors to climb into the life rafts. Despite his weakened state, he helped pull his shipmates from the shark-infested waters.
I got all this kid. I said, I can't lift you, but you'll have to pull your life jacket off. Maybe I can lift you then. And just as then he pulled that life jacket off, he passed out on me. But I wouldn't turn loose. I hung on to that thing. He's here today. I mean, he's still alive today.
Navy pilot Lieutenant R. Adrian Marks was next to arrive on scene. Initially, he believed he would be making a routine rescue of a downed pilot or a small crew. He was not prepared for the horrible sight that awaited him.
Marks arrived there in late afternoon. He circled the area, and members of his crew observed men in the water being eaten by sharks. Against standing orders not to land at sea, Marks landed his seaplane in 12-foot swells and rescued 56 men from the sea. The actions that he took were highly courageous and undoubtedly saved a lot of lives.
Marks and his crew immediately distributed water to the dehydrated sailors. Dr. Haynes was finally able to offer some relief to the men in his care.
I had a couple of cans of water and a little 1-ounce cup. I would pour out 1 ounce of water, say it's for that man. They would pass it down one man to another. And not one man cheated. Not one. I think that exemplifies what our group was like in the water.
When Lieutenant Marks began bringing the delirious survivors on board his plane, he became the first to learn the shocking truth, the unthinkable identity of the mystery ship.
The first guy that he picked up, he says, "What ship are you from?" And they said the Indianapolis. And that's when all hell broke loose.
Bobbing in the swells of the Philippine Sea, Navy pilot Lieutenant R. Adrian Marks could not believe the nightmarish scene surrounding him. The USS Indianapolis, pride of the Fifth Fleet, had been sunk, and what was left of her crew had been adrift without food or water for 4 days. Marks radioed that there were at least 150 survivors in the water. Dozens of Navy ships raced to the scene. The Cecil J. Doyle was the first to arrive at 12 a.m. on August 3rd. She took aboard 96 men, the only survivors from Dr. Lewis Haynes' group of 400 swimmers. In the ensuing hours, rescue ships continued to arrive, and one by one plucked the emaciated sailors out of the warm waters that had been their home for nearly a week. Scores of sailors had been rescued, but one group remained adrift in the South Pacific. The Rafter group of Captain Charles Butler McVeigh and Al Havens. Their salvation didn't arrive until 24 hours after the first plane circled overhead, when the USS Ringness appeared on the horizon.
It was one of the most beautiful sights that you can imagine. See that bow of that ship splitting that water open, those waves. He was probably coming 30 knots, and he pulled up right alongside, threw that thing into reverse and stopped right alongside, sent his men down the ladder. Some of us could climb the ladder. Most all of us had to help. We got halfway, and then the sailors aboard, they came down and helped us up.
McVeigh and Havens' group was the last to be rescued. Of the 1,196 men aboard the Indianapolis when she was torpedoed, only 316 survived. Many of the surviving crew members were taken aboard the hospital ship Tranquility, and ferried to the naval base in Guam, where they were treated for severe burns, dehydration, and shark bites. Officers and crew of the Tranquility could not fathom how the Indianapolis and so many of her men could perish in the South Pacific without the Navy's knowledge. On August 6, 1945, as the survivors convalesced, they were given the news that their secret cargo, the atomic bomb, had been successfully dropped on Hiroshima. As a tribute to the men, the flight crew of the Enola Gay had scrawled a special message on the bomb that changed history. A present for the souls of the Indianapolis crew. The news of the Indianapolis sinking and the massive loss of life was conveniently buried on the back page of the same paper that announced that Japan had surrendered, ending World War II. Once the post-war euphoria had abated, the American public, including the families of the deceased, demanded answers. On the evening of November 12, 1945, the directive came down from Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal and Fleet Admiral Ernest King. Captain Charles Butler McVeigh III, commanding officer of the USS Indianapolis, was to be court-martialed.
Captain McVeigh was charged with 2 charges. The first charge was negligently suffering his vessel to be hazarded or placing his ship at risk by not zigzagging. The second charge was failure to order abandoned ship in a timely manner.
Against the wishes of Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz and others who believed that McVeigh was simply guilty of poor judgment, the trial commenced on December 3, 1945. Among the Indianapolis crew members called to testify by the Navy was Dr. Lewis Haynes.
As a group, we all thought this was terrible, that McVeigh should not be court-martialed. This was just terrible, and it was.
While testimony revealed the myriad naval communications and mishaps leading up to and following the Indy's sinking, it did little to cast a negative light on Captain McVeigh. In an effort to bolster their case, the prosecution stunned the world when they flew the commander of the Japanese sub that had torpedoed Indianapolis over from Japan to testify against McVeigh. Clad in a loose-fitting blue suit, the stoic Machitsura Hashimoto took the stand.
Hashimoto testified that had the Indianapolis been zigzagging, he would have had to alter his approach, and targeting would have been more difficult, but he nonetheless would have been able to sink the ship.
Despite the favorable testimony of the enemy commander Hashimoto, Captain McVeigh bore the brunt of the blame for the sinking of the Indianapolis. On January 3, 1946, the verdict was returned. McVeigh was acquitted on the charge of failure to properly abandon ship, but he was convicted on the more serious charge of hazarding his vessel. McVeigh's sentence was later remitted, and he was promoted to Rear Admiral. But despite finally attaining the rank of his boyhood ambitions, Admiral Charles Butler McVeigh III never returned to sea. The crestfallen skipper of the USS Indianapolis couldn't shake the memory of all the young men who perished under his command. The last shot in the tragic saga wasn't fired from a Japanese sub or a Navy destroyer. On November 6, 1968, a despondent Charles Butler McVeigh III took his service revolver and committed suicide on the front porch of his Litchfield, Connecticut home. The worst sea disaster in the history of the U.S. Navy had claimed its final victim.
When he committed suicide, it hurt. We tried to tell him, Captain McVeigh, you are not guilty of that. But the people that lost their loved ones on board the ship, they kept writing him awful nasty letters. But he didn't deserve that.
Someone had to be singled out, and it happened to be him. And that was just absolutely devastating. To see such a fine man, go this way.
Today, the survivors of the USS Indianapolis still gather to reminisce and remember.
It's wonderful to see them. We're one of a bunch, one of a kind. We went through something other and we shared it. And we will share it as long as any of us are living.
You gotta salute the flag. We walk up to each other and we hug each other, and we are a family. And you feel that way. You don't feel the years that have piled on. You've joined your brothers. You've found a long-lost brother.
It's been over 50 years since the Indianapolis disappeared beneath the waves of the Philippine Sea. Memories of those who died remain strong.
I stopped going to reunions. It was too traumatic, you know. A little girl like you would come up to me and say, "Do you remember my daddy?" His name was.
Since time immemorial, men have turned oceans into battlefields in the dark hours of war, imperiling their lives with both the brutality of combat and the inconstant temper of the waves. The 880 men of the USS Indianapolis who perished in the South Pacific may best be remembered in the Navy hymn that concluded Sunday services at the Mare Island shipyard. O Savior, whose almighty word the winds and waves submissive heard, who walkest on the foaming deep and calm amid its rage did sleep, O hear us when we cry to thee for those in peril on the sea.